Okay, so now we're on record, the normative and the empirical. In this session, we round up our analysis of the difference between values and facts. Values are about what we should or should not do. Facts are about what is or is not. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes we mistake values for facts. Sometimes we mistake values for facts. There are factual statements with implicit value judgments. Examples. Look at the difference between the following two statements. These are supposed to be factual statements. 1, the president has lifted a lockdown. 2, the president has rightly lifted a lockdown. The first is a factual statement. The second is like the first. The second is like the first, but with an implicit value judgment represented by the word rightly. So the second is a value judgment. So you can transform a statement from a factual statement to a value judgment by simply adding just one word that shows a value judgment. The president has rightly lifted the lockdown. In other words, we are saying the president is right to have lifted a lockdown. You know? So there are certain factual statements that are in fact value judgments. We call these kinds of value judgments implicit value judgments. So look out for both the explicit and implicit meanings of statements. Without confirming these two kinds of meanings, you could be misled. You could see how important this distinction is to our business of logical reasoning. Now let's look at metaphors and proverbs. Crucial to logical reasoning is the need to single out expressions that should not be interpreted literally. Two of such expressions are metaphors and proverbs. So if we know what they are, we need to know what they are in order to know how to handle them as logicians. Metaphors. These are sentences that should not be interpreted literally. Examples. Don't judge a book by its cover, which means don't evaluate things just by looking at their appearances. It's raining cats and dogs. It's raining heavily. So we don't interpret metaphors literally. Proverb. This is a sentence with a literal meaning as well as a non-literal one. Non-literal meaning is usually a piece of advice. So a proverb has both a literal meaning and a non-literal one. And the non-literal one is the one that is meant to offer advice. That means a proverb is a multiple purpose speech act. It is a speech act that has multiple purposes. Examples, only a fool tests the depth of a river with two of its feet. The advice is don't embark on a venture without a proper reflection. So you can see that this sentence has a literal meaning. Actually, it is not wise to test the depth of a river by climbing in with two of your feet. And then it doubles up as an advice that whatever you do, you just, venture into it, a little bit at a time so that it doesn't consume you if it goes wrong, It takes a whole village to raise a child. The advice is that the community is responsible for the moral upbringing of a child. No one can lick his or her own elbow. The advice is that no person, the implicit advice is that no person is an island. You need the assistance of other people in your life. Now, the intentions behind proverbs. Proverbs are mostly used to advise people, but proverbs are not always sincerely used. For instance, the proverb, no one can lick his or her own elbow, can be used to encourage corruption or convince someone that it is impossible to fight corruption. So the intentions behind proverbs are not always positive. A little exercise. Provide one example each of a metaphor and a proverb. How is a metaphor different from a proverb? So you can do those exercises later on when you rewatch this video. But we shall just go ahead. Now let's look at meaning defects in language. Meaning defects. In addition to metaphors and proverbs, there are expressions whose meanings are defective. Two examples of defective meaning in expressions are vagueness and ambiguity. So while we just want to look at vagueness and ambiguity and then the problems they are capable of generating. Let's begin with vagueness. An expression is vague when its meaning has no boundaries of application, or an expression is vague when its meaning is not precise. So to combine these two descriptions, now when the meaning of an expression is not precise, then that means such a meaning has no boundaries of application. For instance, he will be here any moment from now. Any moment from now is not precise. So it has no boundary of application, because any moment from now is anything from right now till Jesus Christ comes again. You know, I'll come to see your parents at the right time. At the right time is not precise. So it has no boundary for application. That car is expensive. Expensive only suggests that the price of something is higher than normal. But how high it is, there's no idea. Yeah, expensive is not precise. You can't put a figure. You can't put a peg somewhere and say this is the price. This is how expensive. Now let's go to ambiguity. A sentence is ambiguous when it is capable of more than one meaning. A sentence is ambiguous when it's capable of more than one meaning. So there are three types of ambiguity. We have lexical ambiguity, referential ambiguity, and syntactic ambiguity. Now, lexical ambiguity, if an ambiguity occurs in a single word, then it is called lexical ambiguity. This type of ambiguity usually occurs in words that have the same spelling but different meanings. Such words are called homographs. So when a single word has more than one meaning, or the way it was used in a passage generates more than one possible meaning, you call it a homograph. You call that word a homograph. He lives close to the bank. He lives close to the bank. Does he live close to a river bank or a bank as a financial institution? Military head 6 arms. Is it the head of a military man or the head of the military as an institution? Is it the arms of a military man, or are you talking about ammunition, weapons? Other homographs include race, chest, light, and so on. When you talk about race, are you talking about a struggle in which someone wants to finish something before the others? Or are you talking about a class of people based on skin color? So there are other such homographs. Referential ambiguity. This type of ambiguity occurs when a phrase or a word in a particular context could refer to two or more properties or things in a sentence. Referential ambiguity occurs from the use of pronouns and quantifiers. So when the ambiguity is coming from a pronoun or some kind of quantifier, then it's called the referential ambiguity. That's an ambiguity that occurs, an ambiguity that comes from reference. Examples: the boy told his father about the theft case and he was upset. The boy told his father about the theft case and he was upset. Who is upset, the boy or the father? The pronoun he does not specify which of the pronouns in the sentence it is referring to. He used the seed to sell the soap to me, but I did not buy it. What did I not buy? The deceit or the soap? So here too, the pronoun it fails to specify which noun it is referring to. So this is why it is called referential ambiguity. Then we have the syntactic or sentential ambiguity. When a sentence contains two or more possible meanings, then the sentence is ambiguous. Syntactic or sentential ambiguity occurs when it is clear what the individual words in the sentence mean, but it is not clear what the whole sentence means. Example or examples. Today we shall be discussing violence on TV. Is it that discussion of violence will be held on a TV program, or that violence on TV will be the topic of discussion? Another example. The dean will talk about cheating in the seminar room. Is the dean going to talk about cheating that happened in the seminar room, or is cheating the topic of the lecture she's going to deliver in this seminar room? So these kinds of ambiguities are called syntactic or sentential ambiguity. Now, what is the difference between vagueness and ambiguity? A vague term does not indicate a clear boundary of applying the meaning of the term. On the other hand, an ambiguous term gives us ideas of what it means, but suggests more than one accepted meaning, leaving us confused as to which of the meanings particularly is intended. So in summary, vagueness means no clear meaning. Ambiguity means more than one accepted meaning. The role of vagueness and ambiguity in language. Vagueness and ambiguity can facilitate equivocation and disagreement in language. So two problems that vagueness and ambiguity can cause are equivocation and disagreement. The role of vagueness and ambiguity can also be found in metaphors and proverbs. Now, of course, metaphors are intentionally vague, so that you can manipulate them to, or rather you can interpret them in a way that are not represented by the words. Okay. Equivocation. Equivocation occurs when someone shifts unannounced from one meaning of a word to another meaning of the same word in the same passage. This is usually done with the hope of confusing the reader. Equivocation is to take advantage of ambiguity, because equivocation means taking advantage of the ambiguous nature of words to persuade or confuse readers. We shall study equivocation as a form of argument later in chapter 12, but let's see some examples of equivocation. So examples: time flies like an arrow and fruit flies like a banana. Time flies like an arrow and fruit flies like a banana. The first flies is a verb meaning moving in the air. The second flies is a noun indicating fruit insects. So the first like is used for the purpose of comparison. The second is used as a verb indicating preference for something. Okay. I'm celebrating my birthday in a gay manner because I'm gay. So the first use of gay means happiness, and the second means the state of being homosexual. So when you use a single word, when you use a particular word more than once in a passage, and the two or three of them have different meanings, you use it, in a way that suggests it's the same meaning, but the meanings are different, and that's equivocation. Strategy for identifying equivocation. First of all, ascertain whether a word has been used more than once in the sentence or passage. So if you want to identify equivocation, you first of all have to look for words or a word that has been used more than once in a passage. Then proceed to check if the word or expression has different meanings in the sentence or passage. If you are able to make these two observations, then the sentence or passage contains equivocation. The importance of identifying equivocation. Note that vagueness, ambiguity, and equivocation are very important in clarifying arguments. If certain expressions are vague or ambiguous in an argument, their meaning needs to be clarified before we can proceed to evaluate the argument. So some exercises: determine which of the following is vague or ambiguous. We should raise tax on the rich. We should raise tax on the rich. This should be vague because we don't know how we determine who are rich.
Ah.
Okay, so let me mute everyone again. Yeah, so the first one is ambiguous. I'll be back later. Oh, sorry, the first one is vague. I'll be back later. That's vague too, because later has no clear boundary of application. I'm renting the new apartment. The new apartment. That's vague, it's vague because we don't know which apartment you're talking about. We have so many apartments in the world. Stolen jewel found by 3. That's ambiguous. So number 4 is ambiguous because the question is whether the stolen jewel was found beside a tree or whether it was the tree that actually found the jewel. So it's ambiguous. There are 2 contesting meanings there. Democracy is freedom for all. That's vague. That's vague because all is not defined. What do you mean by all? Is it all human beings or all animals or all birds and so on? 2 vehicles collide, 1 died. Is that vague or ambiguous?
Ambiguous.
It's ambiguous because
No, so it's not ambiguous. It's a book.
Because
it's ambiguous.
2 vehicles. So which one? One died. So which one? It means it is a vague.
the point is that 1 died could mean 1 person died or one of the vehicles died.
Yes.
Remember that 1
It's a
died.
vague.
Yeah, remember that 1 died is supposed to be referring to the content of the sentence. So 1 died should be that one of the vehicles died, which is not logical. And so 1 died is normally what we use when we refer to human beings. And the only things that could be in the vehicles were humans. So there are 2 meanings, either that one of the vehicles died or that one of the people died.
Oh, yeah, it's a vague.
All right, no, it is ambiguous. It's not vague because it's ambiguous because there are 2 possible meanings, not that there is no clear meaning.
Yes. Okay, sir.
Then number
Okay, sir, we've gotten.
yes, there's no, the meanings are clear. There are 2 clear meanings. None of the meanings is unclear. So there is no problem with the clarity of the meaning. The problem is with the multiplicity of the meaning. There are 2 clear meanings, All right, so that's how you determine. And then 7, court tries shooting defendant. Court tries shooting defendant.
Ambiguous.
It's
Sir,
ambiguous.
please, it's
It
ambiguous.
is ambiguous. Ambiguous.
Yeah, so it's ambiguous because there are two possible meanings. Either the court attempted to shoot the defendant or that the court is trying a defendant in a shooting case. So 2 meanings. That makes it ambiguous. All right, so now we go to senses of law. We just want to take a brief survey of what law is to round up this class. Now, senses of law, we need to understand the different ways in which we use the word law. We have 7 senses. We have natural law, civil law, cultural norm, conventional social rule, customary law, moral law, logical law, mathematical law, divine law. Okay, so for the definition of law, there's no single definition of law. It all depends on which sense of law is in question. So you can't really define law because there are so many senses of laws. So you can only define each sense, or when you talk about each sense, then we can talk about what it means. So we treat the different senses along with their definitions. Natural laws. Natural laws are also called scientific laws. They refer to statements describing the regularity or uniformity in the pattern of events or properties of things in the world. So we form these laws based on past experiences. If, for instance, you observe that the sun always rises in the east and sets in the west, that's a natural or scientific law. And then we have other examples of natural law. Planets revolve around the sun. The atomic weight of gold is 12. Animals survive on oxygen. Anything that has weight falls to the ground if suspended in the air. So we know these things from our experiences. So we regard them as natural laws or scientific laws. But we have other kinds of laws, civil or statutory laws. Civil laws are laws made by man to regulate human behavior. So they are man-made laws, usually legal instruments accompanied by sanction and backed by force. Examples. So this is the kind of law, or these are the kinds of laws we study in the law school. So scientists are studying natural laws, and then lawyers are studying civil laws. So examples of civil law, you have commercial law, tax law, criminal law, corporate law, constitutional law, traffic law, human rights law, and so on. They must be obeyed by all citizens, and they are accompanied by prescribed punishment for disobedience. Then we have cultural norms. Cultural norms, social conventions, or social rules. These are common understandings about how we should do certain things, whether in traditional societies, in the case of cultural norms, or modern societies, in the case of social conventions, or in any society, group, organization, or institutions, in case of social rules. Disobedience is not normally punishable, but it attracts social disapproval. So examples include how we should dress, how we should speak, how we should receive visitors, worship, eat, observe public holidays, attend social functions. If you don't do any of these things well, or according to the way people expect, there's no punishment. But there will be disapproval, and perhaps the disapproval is the punishment. For instance, if you dress in a way that some people describe as scandalous and you cross the street, well, there might be no law, something like 2 years in prison or something like that. But there would be social reactions. There will be reactions of disapproval and those things, and all this. Okay, so let me. So I've just muted everyone again. So now that's for cultural laws, cultural norms. They usually don't have punishment, but they are accompanied by their disobedience are normally greeted with social disapproval. Then we have customary law. This is when a cultural norm becomes a civil law. When a cultural norm becomes a civil law, in that case, it becomes statutory and its disobedience becomes punishable. We have customary courts in rural areas. So some of these cultural norms, they could be transformed into law, and then we call them customary law. Examples of cultural norms that could become customary law include the powers of a chief, traditional marriage rights and duties, and so on. Moral law. Now, there's no universally accepted definition of moral law, but moral laws are about rules prescribing how we should or should not behave. Usually for a rule of behavior to be regarded as a moral law, such a rule is universally respected. So a moral law is something about how we should behave or not. And usually for something to be a moral law, it is universally accepted. The person using Techno Pop 4, can you mute your mic? Unfortunately, your name is not there so that I can call you out. Okay, so I've muted him. So moral laws include things like stealing Do not steal, kill, discriminate, take another person's spouse, and so on. Now, you notice that anything that is called a moral law is respected worldwide. You know, people don't like their possessions to be stolen. So stealing is not attractive in our society. But if you go to far away Russia, to any community in the US or in America or in Europe, wherever you go, stealing is not attractive because when you steal, the person whose possession was stolen will become angry. The same applies to some of the other things that qualify as moral laws. So for something to become a moral law, everyone all over the world respects it. That's what gives it the title of a moral law. If it is not universal, then it is not a moral law. Maybe it is a customary law, a custom. There are things that are customs or norms, but they are not moral laws. In some societies, they are done. In other societies, they are not done. Those ones cannot be moral law. A moral law is usually universal. Everyone is forced, is compelled to respect it, because when you go against it, it causes pain. Right. Logical law. Logical laws are rules for reasoning. So the most common examples include deductive and inductive reasoning. So we'll be doing these two kinds of reasoning this semester, or rather introducing them, because they go a long way beyond this class, this course. Example of deductive reasoning: all men are mortal. Kofi is a man, therefore Kofi is mortal. So this is an example of deductive reasoning. If you say that all men are mortal, and if you say that Kofi is a man, then the conclusion Kofi is mortal is just a logical deduction, like we do in mathematics. There's no argument about it. And this kind of argument is not impeachable. No one can argue with it unless you want to argue that 2 + 2 is not 4. So that's why they are called deductive arguments. We shall be treating them in our very next class.
Hello.
Then we have mathematical laws. Mathematical laws are rules for mathematical operations. Adogad, you raised your hand.
I was saying that someone could argue that Kofi is not a male name.
Kofi is what?
Someone could argue that Kofi isn't a male name.
Kofi is mortal.
The person asking the question, please amplify your voice.
He says someone can say that Kofi is.
Hello.
Kofi is immortal. Anyway, save that question.
Continue.
Yeah, but save that question for our next class. I'm sure when you ask it in the next class, it will be very relevant, because we'll be doing precisely this kind of reasoning.
Okay, sir.
Mathematical laws. Mathematical laws are rules for mathematical operations. Example: never divide by 0. That's a mathematical law. All the rules of addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and so on are mathematical laws. Okay, then we have divine laws, laws credited with a supernatural source. Examples depend on the religion in question. So divine laws depend on the religions. For example, in Christianity, there are laws about relating with God, praying, forgiving those who offend us, and so on. So summation of work. At the end of this session, you should be able to identify factual statements that are implicit value judgments, distinguish metaphors from proverbs, understand vagueness, ambiguity, and equivocation, understand the various senses of law. Remember to do your textbook exercises. I hope that by now you guys have bought your textbooks. Okay, so any questions? We'll take some questions now before we round up. In our next class, we'll begin deductive reasoning or deductive arguments. Candid, go ahead. Candid, can you ask your question?
No. Hello, sir.
Go ahead.
Please, with the value judgment, you were talking about the moral and immoral value judgments. But in the summary, I can see implicit value judgment.
That has nothing to do with whether it is moral or immoral. Whichever one, the implicit is when you make something that is a factual statement, but it is actually a value judgment. So if you didn't come early and if you didn't meet it, then you have to watch the video.
Okay, sir.
Then the Galaxy A11, can you ask a question?
Where will we get the textbook?
The textbook, philosophy department, opposite Legon Main Hall. You cross the the road, the street in front of Legon Main Hall, and then come to the philosophy department.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? Joshua?
We thank you for the video, but please can we also have the slides?
No, you can't have the slides. It's the video and the textbook. The textbook is better than the slide. So you go for the textbook. And then if you want to see the slides are contained in the video. So as you are watching the video, you are seeing the slides. Anything different from that, just look at your textbook, because the textbook contains exercises that you should do. All right, so no more questions. I guess I'll be leaving you guys now. Let's hang on for a few seconds. Probably someone could raise her hand again. Okay, so I think that's it. I'll leave you guys to go about the other businesses. So thank you for attending the class. I'm going to end in a few seconds. So bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
You can access the videos on Sakai.
Thank you, sir.
I shall be uploading the video in a few minutes. Yeah, I think in 3 minutes, the video is uploaded.
Okay, sir.
All right.